Hi everyone, and welcome to another Wellness Wednesday. This is Dr. Whitney, Dr. Mom ND, and I know last week I had mentioned doing a tour of the new Sage Apothecary store, which will house the new Holistic Home Health and Wellness office. However, due to contractor rescheduling, the cement flooring guy is going to be in there patching and buffing and polishing today, and that would have not made for a good tour. So to be postponed for that. So I came into the office, not quite sure what I wanted to talk about, but once again, I got my new EcoParent magazine for the spring 2021 quarter, and there's a whole bunch of fun articles in here. So I thought about going over some of the products because there's a bunch of food stuff and zero waste stuff, which is all things that I intend to carry at Sage Apothecary, and I thought that would be fun. But then, I thought, okay, current events, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, right? People are still talking about the 500,000 lives lost, and I thought, rather than just talk about straight coronavirus, what if we talked about it from a different angle, which is kind of how I just settled on a combination of things. So this article in the EcoParent magazine was called Unintended Victim, Pandemic Proofing Your Child's Microbiome. And basically it touches a whole lot on the theory of a too clean hygiene, which I don't know if I've specifically talked about in the past, but I know personally, I just cringe when I see the little kids running around with their backpacks, and on their backpacks, the parents have attached one of those like hanging bottles of hand sanitizer. So, we need the bugs, believe it or not. I know mainstream media has everyone completely terrified of them at this point in history, as if viruses are something alive and completely able to self-replicate, which they are not on their own, and that they're somehow just like floating around in the air waiting to kill us all, which again is not the case. So again, I just have to shake my head when I see someone outside on a walk by themselves with absolutely nobody around them wearing a mask, someone driving around their car by themselves with a mask. I mean, that is how perpetuated this narrative has gone, that people are either that uninformed or uneducated, or just, and or a combination of that, scared, right? That's where we are as a society. So, once again, I thought, this bears going back to and talking about again that, we need the bugs, the bacteria and the viruses, we need them to live. They don't need us. So there's a few different things with that. One was this article. One was a book that came to mind, which I must have at home because it's not in my bookcase back there. Up there are my top 2 rows are my children's books. But it was called Let Them Eat Dirt. I still to this day have no idea how I got this book. It just showed up on my doorstep free from a publisher. It must have been several years ago, and I haven't ever had a chance to read the whole thing. But the gist of it is that kids, again, who play outside, who play in the dirt, who get dirty, who don't live in a sanitized bubble, they're healthier, right? They've done studies that show that kids that have pets and grow up on farms and they're around animals have less allergies, less asthma, all these things. So the whole concept of just, sanitizing everything is actually going to do more harm than good in the long run, because your immune system, it's like a muscle that needs, flexing and a workout to kind of stay strong. And so in a lot of instances where allergies come from is the fact that your body, your immune system is like, hey, I don't have anything better to do, and you've cleaned away all of the bad things for me or to deal with, and now I'm left with things that are good for me, but I don't have anything else to do. So I guess I'm just going to create a response to them too. So things that shouldn't normally cause a reaction of your immune system, that are benign, harmless, whatever, but yet your immune system creates a reaction to them, that is an allergy, right? That's where the symptoms come from. That's why when your nose runs, it's clear. There's no junk there, right? It's not yellow or green. There's no like bugs that your body is killing, and you know, that's the secretions of your body's way of eliminating them. So, you know, I don't have allergies that I know of. I don't have a lot of allergy people in my home, but I know whole families that just, you know, suffer miserably with allergies every year. So something to think about, you know, are you reaching for the Clorox wipes all the time? Are you slathering yourself in hand sanitizer all the time? You might want to rethink that, or use something less caustic, you know, something more gentle, like, you know, natural, like vinegar or apple cider vinegar. I know people create all kinds of home cleaning things. But just remember that, you know, some dirt is good for you in that regard. The other one that came to mind was, I've shared this before, The Body book by Bill Bryson. I love this guy. I was so excited that he wrote this book, and I still haven't gotten all the way through it, but he has really good humor. So he started writing travel books. So I was surprised that he wrote this one. But there's a whole chapter in here that's called Microbial You. And I've obviously talked about it before at some point, because I have a printout in here with some highlighted stuff and some notes on it. So I must have talked about especially the germ theory at some point. So once again, you know, from the contagion myth, among other things, we know that the germ theory is a lie. We know that the bugs in and of themselves are not causing the issue, because they've never been able to prove contagion, which is why the book by Dr. Cowan and Sally Morell is called The Contagion Myth. Even with the Spanish flu, they were never able to prove that the bug was the cause of the issue alone. They couldn't reinfect people. So in this article from EcoParent, they talk about the hygiene hypothesis. And this is a theory stating that a decline in childhood illness due to increased hygiene correlates over cleanliness with the risk of developing allergic and inflammatory conditions. This is getting attention as people become more concerned with the hypervigilant germ avoidance and dependence on antibacterial everything in the shadow of COVID-19. This theory also places humans in the position of being the only organism experiencing an impact in this dynamic. Updated concepts, including the old friends theory or the biodiversity hypothesis, consider the relationship between humans and the environment to be reciprocal in nature. That humans are part of an interdependent web of existence, and our impact on microbes is just as important as theirs on us. So, historically, right, we have been taught to think that all microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi are dangerous things that must be avoided or eliminated. However, these small creatures are present and are meant to be so, both inside and outside of the body, and play a critical role in digestion, skin health, immune function, and overall well-being. When humans were evolving in a context of hunting, gathering, and migration, our systems and our DNA learned to not only tolerate, but to come to rely on the microorganisms in, on, and around them. Interactions with these microbes, in fact, provided the opportunity for an immune system to become more resilient, right? Stronger. As our species made revolutionary cultural shifts into agriculture, industry, germ theory, and the modern Anthropocene era, in which human activity has the greatest influence on Earth, our relationships with the natural world also shifted. Our dependence on our microbial friends, however, did not diminish. Even though many of us no longer drink from fresh lakes or wrangle wild boars, our ancient DNA still expects to interact with a diverse array of microbes. So being denied contact with these organisms is just as harmful to our health as being deficient in nutrients like vitamin C. So hence, like what we were talking about, if your immune system has nothing to react to interact with, to keep it strong and healthy, it's going to start doing some wonky things. So we still interact with and acquire helpful organisms from the world around us from the moment of birth onward. Okay, so that's actually another really important point. When a baby is C-section, right, not always the mother's choice, often an emergency, it's really, 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 really important for that baby to be breastfed and or given additional probiotics, because whether you like it or not, this is, you know, probably gross, but when the baby passes through the vaginal canal, they are slathered in microbiome. Like they get that all from mom. That's all super, super protective and healthy for the baby. That's why you see sometimes C-section babies are some of the sickest little infants. There's failure to thrive. They don't gain weight. They have digestive issues, just all kinds of problems. So let's see. Yeah, and they mentioned that too, whether born vaginally or via C-section, breastfed or formula fed, how many members are in our household, whether we interact with pets or have a history of antibiotic use. All these things play integral roles in our potential to encounter helpful organisms that will better prepare our bodies to fight off infections, parasites, and bacteria. They mentioned the use of antibiotics, which we all know has increased exponentially over the last few generations, and they do have a place and purpose, right? Like sometimes you need antibiotics. The problem is antibiotics are broad spectrum. Broad spectrum means they kill everything, the good and the bad, right? And I think most people, by some standard today, have come in contact or heard about probiotics, right? And the importance of probiotics and gut health and so on and so forth. Other aspects of that often aren't mentioned are that 80% of your immune cells are also in your gut, as well as about 80% of your serotonin, your happy hormone, is made in your gut. So keeping your gut healthy, taking probiotics and keeping that environment healthy for keeping your microbiome happy does a lot more than just, regulate your bowel movements and reduce, gas and digestive discomfort. So we have used lots of antibacterial agents, broad spectrum antibiotics, et cetera, killing off this whole great environment where our body's used to adapt in order to survive. Let's see where else. In addition to this, right, what's happening, what we're seeing is that the more we use antibiotics or antibiotic type cleaners and sanitizing things, these organisms are super, super simple organisms, right? Like we're made of like trillions and trillions of cells. These little guys are just a few cells, so they can evolve like that, right? So one of the issues we have is antibiotic resistance, right? That's where MRSA came from, methicillin resistant Staph aureus. That's why it's such a tricky, messy infection to get rid of, which I have helped. Actually, now that I think about it, several people, and one guy, it was his whole family he gave it to. And a lot of practitioners don't want to deal with it because they figure, oh my God, as soon as it comes into your office, it's horribly contagious and it's really hard to get rid of. But we figured out how to get rid of it naturally, and he manages it naturally. So antibiotic resistance, they call them super germs. So you hear this thing about super spreaders. Like I'd be more concerned about the super gonorrhea, right? Like there are legitimately, they're saying strains of gonorrhea now that they have no drugs for. There's no treatment because they're so antibiotic resistant. So it is increasingly shown that children with lower exposure to organisms than their bodies expect do not develop optimal immune function and are at a greater risk of infection, allergies, asthma, and other autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, such as diabetes and inflammatory bowel disease. Weird. Don't we have like an epidemic of diabetes and obesity and autoimmune disease and bowel disorders? Like everybody I know seems to have celiac or Crohn's or something these days. A clever study out of Sweden, in fact, showed that children living in households where dishes were washed by hand, not sanitized, versus those washed in a dishwasher, which is considered sanitized, had a lower risk of developing allergic disease. The same researchers also showed that when parents cleaned a pacifier that had fallen on the floor with their own mouth, their children had a lower risk of allergies than those whose parents ran the pacifier through a dishwasher. Now, excessive sanitation of hands and surfaces is being further compounded by mask wearing, reducing the likelihood of transmitting airborne and respiratory droplets that contain viruses that young immune systems could be building familiarity with, and reduce physical contact with others, leaving parents baffled at how to balance safety from COVID-19 with the need for developing and maintaining a healthy immune system. So, where else do they talk about here? So, microbiome maintenance during a pandemic. We have a collective responsibility to protect both the vulnerable and our public health resources. We also have a responsibility to protect our children's larger health picture, immunologically, mentally, and socially. So the measures currently promoted do mean children are less likely to interact with harmful viruses, but also with the abundance of other microbes that would potentially be extremely beneficial to their health. So how do we balance the two? While we exercise the public health recommendations, we can still allow for opportunities to get dirty. They say dirt in the mouth behavior is a normal part of childhood and is arguably essential for optimum immune system development, which is, I'm sure, what that book, Let Them Eat Dirt, is basically focusing on. So you need to let them play outdoors, in nature, interact with as many different people and animals in our social bubbles as possible, eat a variety of food, touch as many things as possible within reason. All of these things will increase your children's interaction with organisms that will help them build a robust tolerance. Even interactions with some potentially harmful germs in the context of an otherwise healthy child who has the benefit of helpful microbes already in their system, these also provide opportunities for the immune system to learn how to respond effectively. It is normal, let me emphasize this, to get common viral infections every month for children in their earlier years. This is how their body learns. It is healthy to get the chicken pox, even measles, to get colds, to get the flu. All of these things challenge your body and build your immune system. If you don't get them, your immune system doesn't learn. So, let's see. As their immune system learns how to discern between different infectious agents, their responses become more efficient, resulting in fewer and less severe manifestations of coughs and colds. In fact, their bodies may have already dealt with them before symptoms get a chance to produce external evidence. So, clean hands, basic, simple hygiene, hand washing has had a huge impact on the risk of serious infections, and children should continue to be reminded to wash their hands, obviously before eating and after toileting, playing with animals, sneezing, coughing, or blowing their nose. There is just no need to use an antimicrobial agent. Soap and water does the job just fine. The same strategies also apply to household surfaces. Wipe them down, any high contact surfaces regularly with a clean cloth and nothing more than baking soda or vinegar and water. Deliberately increase your child's exposure to potentially helpful organisms. While walking outdoors in bare feet and getting your hands dirty, think making mud pies, gardening, going on adventures in the forest. All these things have been shown to increase the array of helpful organisms on our skin and even inside the body. So interacting outside is also less conducive to the spread of the virus that causes COVID-19 and increases the opportunity for social interaction, physical activity, vitamin D production, unstructured play, and the myriad of other benefits alongside mental and emotional well-being that come from engaging in a natural environment. I would also add clean, fresh air to that. I mean, maybe that's kind of obvious because you're outside, but maybe it's not, because some people have been hiding in their houses for a year. Fermented, yeah, okay, so favor fermented flavors. Different parts of the bodies contain different types of bacteria. There's over 10,000 different strains in your human microbiome right now. So eating a diet abundant in whole fermented foods can provide a natural source of beneficial bacteria, right? So you can take probiotics, that's great. But again, just like everything else, if you can get the stuff from a whole food diet, that's even better, right? So if you can eat, sauerkraut and kombucha and anything else that's fermented or pickled or whatever, that's all great. This is another beautiful example of how and why humans evolved to rely on microorganisms. In the years before refrigeration, we relied on fermentation as a preservation strategy, utilizing our small friends to keep food available year-round. We became reliant on these organisms internally as well. So, like I said, making homemade kombucha, yogurt, pickles, and sauerkraut, this can all be family fun, right? Like a science experiment. The bacteria that reside in the digestive system are healthier, more diverse, and more useful to us when they are fed abundant prebiotic fiber. This can come in the form of a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains. Now, the only caveat with that, I would say, is if you have done your food intolerance with me, the Carroll method, and you know that you are not fruit intolerant, because fruit can be a primary intolerance. It can also be a combination with sugar. And then whole grains. Grains are fine when properly prepared, but again, making sure that your food intolerance is not like a potato grain combination. So antibiotic awareness, avoid antibiotics in food and opt for organic and antibiotic free, particularly in animal products. So again, this is that whole thing. Like, you have to be able to trace your food sources. It's not just about sustainability. It's about what's been done to the animal and what's been done to the food that the animal is eating. So you may be all for non-GMO, organic produce, and then you buy cow meat or products from a cow that has been fed GMO grain. So if you don't eat inflammatory foods because you know the chemicals and the inflammation is bad for you, what do you think it's doing to the cow? So if the cow eats the crappy food, everything in the cow, its muscle tissue, the milk that comes out that we make all our dairy from, all of that's inflammatory too. So you have to not just look at, you know, the cow, but what the cow ate. Same for chicken, same for fish. This is why we want wild caught fish. This is why we want pasture raised, free range chicken and beef products. And of course, no antibiotics, because if you put the antibiotics in the animal, you're destroying the animal's microbiome. And again, it just is a snowball effect, right? And by the time it gets to us, our food is just, a lot of it is just junk, unfortunately. We're not nourishing our body. We're not fueling health. We're fueling illness and inflammation. So no wonder everybody's sick. No wonder everybody's obese, right? No wonder everybody just is like teetering on the edge of some major health crisis every day. Also, stay away from household products that contain ingredients like triclosan or anything labeled as a disinfectant, okay? Triclosan was always one of my things on my list years ago. That was that was usually the ingredient in most antibacterial soaps, triclosan. So I always said anything with triclosan, don't use. But then I did find an article, I think triclosan was actually banned back in 2011, maybe? I'd have to look through the article, but I have a folder that is my EWG folder, the Environmental Working Group, and I believe when I talked about that before, one of their articles did say that I think maybe like a law was passed and then they were given like 3 to 5 years to phase it out. So it should be done. Triclosan should not be in products anymore, I'm pretty sure, but just know that. Question the necessity of any antibiotic prescription, as many show that antibiotics are overprescribed, especially for children. Befriend the microbiome. Let's see. Rather than becoming embroiled in the narrative fear and anxiety about the agents that cause COVID-19, influenza, and ear infections, nurture an acceptance of, and dare we say gratitude for, the microbiome that is all around us and in us, explaining how some help while some are not so friendly. So again, by teaching our children to care for themselves in other ways like eating well, sleeping well, getting enough exercise and time outdoors, managing stress, which is huge even for parents right now. I'm doing this with so many patients. Everyone will have a healthy foundation and reciprocal relationship with their microbial friends. It has too many micro words. Other household products stating antimicrobial or antibiotic properties are best to be avoided altogether. Antibiotic ingredients are useful in settings such as hospitals and doctors' offices where it's obviously necessary to ensure safety, right, and cleanliness. This diminishes, you know, infections that go through hospitals. But again, overuse can diminish their effectiveness over time, contribute to antibiotic resistance, and have negative environmental impacts, specifically through contaminated water runoff. The following list of ingredients should be used sparingly and avoided if possible. So these are all bad ingredients. Alkyl dimethyl benzyl ammonium chloride. Yes, that was one ingredient. 5 words. Okay, big one. Cloflucarbon, fluorosaline, hexachlorophene, tribromycin, triclocarban, and triclosan. So those are definitely ones to stay away from. Let's see. I'm just trying to think what else. Not that these would be in the products, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head, other ingredients that are harmful too that I tell people about for home care and personal care products are endocrine disrupting agents. So things like parabens and phthalates, anything that's PEG, PEGs, mineral oil. There's a couple other things. So yeah, just stay away from things that are like words you don't want to pronounce. Like you said, you can do a lot with baking soda and vinegar. It's pretty amazing. Let's see. Yes. And we mentioned that sometimes antibiotics are necessary. However, they wipe out the good and bad. So it's really even super important if you're not already taking a probiotic, which everybody should. It should be part of everybody's daily regimen. When you do take an antibiotic, rule of thumb, I used to say at least 100 billion a day for a month after a week-long course of antibiotics. Now, for reference there, little ones are usually, and we're talking infant, maybe up to toddler age, so maybe around 2 to 4-ish. Usually those probiotics are 1 to 5 billion CFU, and then, school age kids up to teenagers, you kind of see 5 to 15-ish billion. And then kind of once you hit that 12 to 16-year-old range, wherever you kind of consider young adults, into adulthood, a healthy maintenance dose would be like 15 to 30 billion CFU daily, right? And again, for reference now, they are making probiotics in the 200 to 500 billion range, specifically like for travel. So where people would go maybe overseas and be worried about, I don't even know, cholera or just other nasty things. They're really, really beefing up their microbiome. Again, what else are you beefing up? Your immune system, right? So all very important. Okay, so overall, microorganisms are present everywhere, and we underestimate both how important they are to our physical, mental, and emotional well-being, as well as the great and misguided effect we have had on them. COVID-19 has drastically changed how we conduct our daily lives, especially when it comes to cleanliness and personal interaction. Our heightened awareness, diligent sanitation, social distancing, and the way we discuss them will be communicated to our children. This is huge, right? This is like what gets passed on to the next generation. If in our enthusiasm to protect them from exposure, we wipe away all the microbial good guys with the bad, we may inadvertently do more harm than good. While indeed your priority during this pandemic is to protect yourself and your family, don't forget about the little friends that are working hard to protect you too, right? So that's the article in EcoParent. And then there was a few more blurbs I wanted to go back to my book, The Body by Bill Bryson, where they talk about, again, just for reference, you are home to trillions and trillions of tiny living things that do a surprising amount of good for you. They provide you with 10% of your calories by breaking down food that you couldn't otherwise make use of. And within this process, they extract beneficial nutriments like vitamins B2, B12, and folic acid. Humans produce 20 digestive enzymes, which is a pretty respectable number in the animal world, but bacteria produce 10,000 or 500 times as many, okay? Let's see. Where was the next? We know surprisingly little about microbes in and around us because overwhelmingly they don't grow in labs, makes them difficult to study. But what can be said is that as you sit here right now, you have something like 40,000 species of microbes calling you home. 900 in your nostrils, 800 more inside your cheek, 1,300 next door on the gums, on your teeth, and as many as 36,000 species, not total number, species, in your gastrointestinal tract. Those such numbers must constantly be adjusted for new discoveries, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. For years, it was commonly stated that we each contain 10 times as many bacterial cells as human ones. It turns out that was a confident sounding figure, came from a paper in 1972 and turned out to be a little more than a guess. In 2016, they actually did a more careful assessment and concluded that each one of us contains about 30 trillion human cells and between 30 and 50 trillion bacterial cells, again, depending on a lot of factors like health and diet. So the numbers are closer to being equal, though it should be noted that 85% of our own cells are actually red blood cells, which aren't technically true cells at all because they don't have any of the useful machinery like nuclei and mitochondria. They're really just containers of hemoglobin, right? Iron, your blood. Let's see. looked at genetically, you have about 20,000 genes of your own within you, but perhaps as many as 20 million bacterial genes. So from that perspective, you are roughly 99% bacterial and not quite 1% you. They talk about how microbial communities can be surprisingly specific, so specific to areas of your body, et cetera, et cetera. And then the second section of this is actually all about viruses, which is awesome, right? Because what are we all terrified of right now? A virus. So he starts out by saying, a virus, in the immortal words of the British Nobel laureate Peter Medawar, is a piece of bad news wrapped up in a protein. Actually, a lot of viruses are not bad news at all, at least not to humans. Viruses are a little weird, right? They're not quite living, but by no means dead. Outside of other living cells, right, they're hosts, they are just inert things, okay? So understand this and tell everyone you know who is driving a car by themselves with a mask on or walking around outside by themselves with a mask on, they're not floating around in the air. They're not just there everywhere around you waiting to attach to you and kill you. It's not how they work. They don't breathe. They don't do much of anything. They actually have no means of locomotion. It means they don't move. They can't move on their own. So literally the only way it goes from me to you is if I sneeze in your face. Okay? That's what happens. They don't have legs. They don't just hang out on a branch like a tick and grab a hold of you. We actually have to go out and collect them off of door handles or handshakes or drawn in with the air we breathe. They do not propel themselves. They hitchhike, right? Most of the time they are as lifeless as a piece of dust, but if you put them into a living cell, they burst into existence and reproduce as furiously as any living thing. Like bacteria, they're incredibly successful. They have endured hundreds of millions of years, such as the herpes virus. They infect all kinds of animals. In this case, herpes even infects oysters, believe it or not. They're terribly small, much smaller than bacteria, too small to be seen under conventional microscopes. If you blew up one to the size of a tennis ball, a human would be 500 miles high. A bacterium on the same scale would be about the size of a beach ball. In the modern sense of a very small organism, the term virus only dates back to the early 1900s. So they talk about how the virus came to be. And it used to be thought that all viruses cause disease, hence the beginning quote by Peter Medawar. But now we know that most viruses infect only bacterial cells and have no effect on us at all. Of the hundreds of thousands of viruses reasonably supposed to exist, just 586 of them are known to infect mammals, and of those, only 263 affect humans. We know very little about most other non-pathogenic viruses because obviously only the ones that cause disease tend to get studied. In 1986, this gal did a crazy study. She was thinking that in the oceans there was no viruses and whatever, so she decided to study seawater. And she found that in an average quart of seawater, there were 100 billion viruses. Somebody else looked into the number of viruses found in healthy human lungs. Okay, again, lungs, right? Respiratory illnesses, right? So we're terrified of viruses, right? We're terrified of getting this one virus because of a respiratory illness. But listen, the average person harbors 174 species of virus in their lungs, okay? 90% of which they had never even seen before, right? So they studied human lungs because they thought, oh, this is a clean space, right? Like there can't be anything nasty in here. And they found 174 viruses in a healthy person. So viruses aren't evil. We've come to learn that bacteria is good for us, right? Healthy bacteria and our microbiome, right? We just talked about it. Understand that viruses are good too, right? Like how long is it going to take us to learn that instead of being terrified of them, right? And understanding that the germ theory is a lie and that these things aren't contagious, not the way that we've been taught, and that there are other things behind the scenes that are causing our health to be compromised and for us to create symptoms which are being blamed on something inappropriately. So, viruses bide their time, they go through evolution, etc., etc. Let's see. The most regular of unwelcome viral encounters is the common cold. Everyone knows that if you get chilled, you are more likely to catch a cold. This is why we call it a cold after all. Yet science has never been able to prove why or even come to that if that is actually so. Colds unquestionably are more frequent in winter than in summer, but that may only be because we spend more time indoors then and are more exposed to others' leakages and exhalations. And they've studied this. We know it's the sun, right? Vitamin D, big part of our immune system. Okay, so the common cold is not a single illness, but rather a family of symptoms generated by a multiplicity of viruses, of which the most pernicious are the rhinoviruses. These alone come in 100 varieties. There are, in short, lots of ways to catch a cold, which is why you never develop enough immunity to stop catching them all. Just like the flu, just like coronaviruses, okay? They're all RNA-based viruses. There's hundreds and hundreds of them. You're never going to vaccinate your way out of it. Just a spoiler, okay? For years, Britain operated a research facility called the Common Cold Unit, but it actually closed in 1989 without ever finding a cure. It did, however, conduct some interesting experiments. In one, a volunteer was fitted with a device that leaked a thin fluid at his nostrils at the same rate that a runny nose would. The volunteer then socialized with other volunteers as if at a cocktail party, and unknown to any of them, the fluid contained a dye visible only under ultraviolet light. When that light was switched on after they'd been mingling for a while, the participants were astounded to discover that the dye was everywhere, on the hands, head, and upper body of every participant, and on glasses, doorknobs, sofas, cushions, everything. So that's kind of funny. So they say the average adult touches their face 16 times an hour, and each of those touches transferred the pathogen from the nose to the snack ball to the doorknob to so on and so on and so on. So again, it's about, like, don't touch yourself. Like, don't reuse the same mask all the time. I mean, good Lord. Let's see. In a similar study in Arizona, they infected a metal door handle and found it only took 4 hours for the virus to spread through the entire building, infecting over half the employees and turning up on virtually every shared surface. In the real world, such things can stay active for up to 3 days. Surprisingly, the least effective way to spread germs, according to yet another study, is kissing. And get this. It was proved almost wholly ineffective among volunteers at the University of Wisconsin who had been successfully infected with cold viruses. Sneezes and coughs weren't much better. The only really reliable way to transfer the cold germs was by physical touch. So at the University of Wisconsin, they actually had people kiss and sneeze and cough in each other's faces, and nobody got it. So I don't know. Let's see. Then that's pretty much all he talks about with viruses, because then he goes on to talk about specifically fungi and protists. So he says, though, in short, there is an astounding array of microbes all around us. We've barely begun to understand their effects on us for good and bad. Let's see. We're still, discovering new bacteria all the time. Well, obviously, because they're just so tiny. They're all over, He goes on to talk about the germ theory and other things that were allegedly discovered. They talk about penicillin. And then let's see. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention this too. So again, bacteria are not to be trifled with. They not only have grown steadily, but more resistant, but have evolved into a fearsome new class of pathogens known with scarcely a hint of hyperbole as superbugs. So then they talk about Staph aureus, as I mentioned. Let's see. So Staph aureus had almost overnight evolved a new drug-resistant form. This is what we now dub MRSA, or methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So within 2 years, it had spread to mainland Europe. Soon after that, it leapt to the United States. So again, everybody's freaking out about this number, right? 500,000, whatever, even though we know probably more than half of those aren't real causes of death from COVID, and that 78% were obese and had other issues. Regardless, right? This is the number we keep seeing blasted on the news every day, even though that only represents 0.015% of the entire US population. But here, listen to this one. MRSA and its cousins kill an estimated 700,000 people around the world every single year. Is everybody freaking out about MRSA? Have we shut down the world because of MRSA? It killed 200,000 people, more than COVID. And it does that every single year. Okay. Until recently, they had a drug that was effective against it, but now resistance to that has begun to emerge as well. So yeah, not cool. And the pharmaceutical industry, of course, have said it's too expensive and not worth the time to develop new antibiotics. You know why? Because they can make liability-free vaccines instead. Let's see. Another possibility is to enlist bacteriophages, a kind of virus, to hunt down and kill harmful bacteria for us, right? So again, viruses can be good things. We also talk about, in the Contagion Myth book, the fact that viruses are more like exosomes, like messengers. So, you know, there's that whole concept as well. If you wanted to get into the non-contagious ideas behind viruses, and the lack thereof of the proof in the germ theory. I'm just looking at this article too. That was a good one. Is germ theory all it's cracked up to be? They do mention that when we are in fear, which a lot of people are, right, and have been for a long time. So not only just fear, stress, chronic fear and chronic stress, our adrenal glands produce and release excess cortisol. This is a powerful immune suppressant, right? And we get sick because our immune system is suppressed by fear and stress. Modern medicine understands this pattern very well and in fact uses synthetic cortisol-like compounds known as corticosteroids to actually suppress the immune system. So they created a drug for it, right? So they know this. They know this. And it talks about homeopathy. We use different, you know, things to find remedies for specific cold and flu symptoms. Let's see. We've all been trained to believe the germ theory, namely that viruses and bacteria make us sick. That all those people in her office suddenly fell ill within days of September 11th led her to wonder if it wasn't something else in them or at least some other factor at play. So she had a story about how, you know, she saw these breakouts of illness in her patients, you know, happened right after September 11th. So obviously it wasn't something contagious, a bug, you know, it was more about the greater issue of the fear and the stress. So everybody freaked out after September 11th and a lot of people's immune system crashed and a lot of people got sick. So Dr. Cowan's theory and Sally Fallon-Morell and the contagion myth ties in with Arthur Furstenberg's work that the EMFs have something to do with this, because at every advance of electricity through our history, we've seen it mess with the energies and biofeedback, biofields in our body, which cause havoc and, you know, our systems go haywire, they become unbalanced, and we have symptoms as a result of that. And that's a good theory for why they've never been able to prove that the bugs are truly contagious. Yes. Is it instead possible that these microbes are in and around us at all times, and what determines whether we get sick is the state of our immune system, the amount of rest we get, how we eat, and how much stress we have in our lives? Perhaps when those are out of whack, then our microbiome becomes imbalanced and those bugs already in us manifest. Again, she notes, it is worth noting that a third of the population carry staph, many strep A, and 10% meningitis, but those people are not sick and everyone is not contracting staph, nor strep, nor meningitis, nor are they fearful of contracting those illnesses, right? Our bodies, our world, and life are also very complex, clearly more complex than we understand, and in particular than we understood when the germ theory of disease was first promulgated over 100 years ago. We now have new information. Illnesses can follow shocks, stress. We can carry diseases without contracting them. We can get illnesses without exposure. Isn't it time we started questioning the germ theory of disease? Yes, it is. Leslie Manoukian, I can't say her last name. This was from her blog, and I think that is exactly why I enjoyed Dr. Cowan's book so much. So, like I said, don't over sanitize everything. Live in the world. Let your body do what it needs to do. It's smarter than we think. So that's everything for today. Hopefully that was enlightening for you guys. If you have questions, let me know, or I'm happy to post about, again, the books that I links to the books that I talked about, or the blogs, or like I said, the EcoParent magazine was the first article too. So I think that's everything for today. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys all next week, possibly for the tour of the Sage Apothecary. We'll see. It's a lot of work to be done there. But I'm excited to have stuff related to this there, and books, the molecule air filter, which the FDA just now cleared to kill bacteria and viruses. So I think the store will be mask free, which will be great. And yeah, I'm just excited to keep teaching people about this stuff, especially as I learn about it too. So, all right, everyone, have a great afternoon, and thank you. I will see you all next week.